My father recently lost his battle with cancer, passing away in the hospital after a long, grueling fight. In the days that followed, our extended family gathered at our house, all of us trying to lean on each other and get through the loss together. On the very first night, my uncles ended up outside, locked in a heated argument. The irony wasn't lost on me. Dad had always wanted everyone to get along, but personal grudges and old land disputes had been festering for years. As the eldest sibling, he was the only one who had never taken sides. He loved everyone too much to be part of the drama and always wished the family would set their differences aside. That night, with everyone watching, my uncle's shouting match escalated in the front yard, until something strange happened. An empty beer bottle, sitting untouched right in front of the mailbox, suddenly shattered into pieces. None of us had touched it. No one had even been near it. And yet, at that exact moment, every single one of us felt pulled toward it, drawn to the bottle, just seconds before it broke. The whole scene went dead silent. My uncles, who had been at each other's throats just moments before, quickly backed off. Later, they each admitted they took it as a clear sign from my father. Cut the crap. The following night, all of us cousins gathered for a family meeting. Just us, no parents, except for my mom. We were trying to figure out how to get the adults to stop their usual feuding. It was frustrating. Dad had barely been gone, and here we were, right back to the same nonsense he hated. It felt especially wrong knowing my grandpa was already stressed enough. We started getting heated, venting our frustration, when suddenly, clear as day, we all heard a voice. It was short, sharp, unmistakable. Oi! It sounded exactly like my father. We all froze, looking at each other, eyes wide. The craziest part? Every single one of us heard it, except my brother, who just happened to be sitting the farthest from where the sound seemed to come from. The next day, my mom went out and bought candles to set up a little altar for Dad. She arranged the space with so much love, placing flowers, snacks, and little things he used to enjoy. But as she did, the grief hit her all over again. She broke down, crying so hard she could barely breathe. My cousin and I were right there, holding her, trying to comfort her when she suddenly whispered to Dad, "If you're okay, show me a sign. If I know you're at peace, I promise I'll be strong. I won't cry anymore." Right then, the candles, which had blown out just moments before, flickered back to life. She gasped, eyes wide, then nearly collapsed. It was one of the wildest things I've ever witnessed. That same night, things got even stranger. Our rabbit, Dad's little buddy, started acting completely out of character. She was darting around like something had spooked her, more frantic than I'd ever seen her. Eventually, she ran straight to my room, pawing at me until I got up. My brother came, too, and we followed her as she led us to the couch, Dad's couch. That was his spot. It was where he used to sit with her, cuddle her, pet her like she was his own kid. When she got to the couch, she froze. Completely still. Terrified. She stayed that way for a few minutes, locked in place, staring at nothing, until, all of a sudden, she started circling the couch. Then, as if in a trance, she hopped down, ran across the room, grabbed one of Dad's old shoes, the ones he wore all the time before he got sick, and dragged it right to the front of the couch. I don't know what to make of it all, but one thing's for sure. Dad hasn't really left us. Not yet. Now that all the extended family has gone home, it's just me, my mom, my brother, and my partner in the house. And let me tell you, things have been strange. We've been hearing him. Dad's footsteps. His familiar cough. Doors opening and closing on their own when no one's nearby. And the dreams. Every single one of us has started dreaming of him. What makes it even weirder is that nothing like this has ever happened before. ever. This house has always felt normal, safe, peaceful, nothing out of the ordinary. We've never been the kind of family that experiences paranormal stuff. And yet, here we are. Obviously, I'm still grieving. It's been hard missing him, feeling the weight of his absence. But now I can't shake this question. How do I talk to him without opening the door to something else? My mom always tells me not to be afraid, that whatever's happening is most likely just Dad. And I want to believe that. I really do. But the truth is, I am a little scared. Not because I think it's him, but because I have no idea what else might be listening. So, how do I do this? Do I just talk to him like I used to? Like he's still here, catching him up on everything that's been happening? Does it even matter when I say his name, daytime, nighttime, anytime? I don't want to do anything disrespectful. I don't want to say something dumb like, "Show me proof you're here," because that just feels wrong. Like I'd be questioning him when deep down, I already know he's around. What I do want is to let him know how much I still love him. That I think about him every single day. That I'm doing my best to take care of Mom and my brother, even though we miss him more than words can say. But by speaking to him, could I be inviting something else in? That's the part one need to be careful about. This house has always been a safe place. And I want to keep it that way. I don't think anyone outside the tiny town where I grew up has ever heard of this. I've told the story plenty of times, across different states, to different people, and every single time, I get blank stares. Like I just made the whole thing up. Trigger warning: this story involves abuse and harm involving children. When I was a kid, I went to a small school that covered everything from kindergarten through 8th grade. Every day, we had to walk across campus to the cafeteria, and right along that path stood this old, burned-out school building. Windows shattered and boarded up. Chains wrapped tight around the doors. The whole thing looked like something straight out of a horror movie. Teachers used to mess with us, saying that if we misbehaved, Bloody Bones would come out of that building and snatch us up. We were just little kids then, but by the time we hit 3rd grade, we'd started daring each other to get close to the building. The bravest of us would run up to the windows, peek through the boards, and count to 10. And of course, every single kid who did it swore they saw something inside. Just typical childhood nonsense, right? By the time I got to 6th grade, the school finally decided to renovate the place. They tore out the damaged parts, put in new walls, fresh windows, the works. When they reopened it as the Math and Science building, it looked brand new, clean, modern, completely unrecognizable from what it used to be. And after that, Bloody Bones just kind of faded into the background. Nobody talked about it anymore. Fast forward to the end of 8th grade. A group of us were hanging around outside the cafeteria one morning, just talking about school, reminiscing. A lot of us were heading to different high schools, so it felt like the end of an era. Someone randomly brought up Bloody Bones, and we all had the same reaction: wow, I haven't thought about that in years. That's when the janitor walked by. Now, this guy, Jerry, he was old. He'd been working at that school for as long as any of us could remember. Hell, he'd been the janitor there since the 80s. And before that, he was a student at the very same school. So, naturally, we asked him, "Hey, Jerry, what's the deal with Bloody Bones?" He stopped, looked at us for a second, and then, without a hint of hesitation, he told us a story that still makes my stomach turn. According to him, way back in the day, the school didn't just serve as a regular elementary and junior high. It also functioned as a day home for special needs children and adults. a place where local families could drop off loved ones who required full-time care so they could go to work. The school would watch over them, feed them, keep them engaged with activities. Then, one day, something horrible happened. A group of kids cornered one of these individuals in the boys' bathroom inside the auditorium. They weren't just messing around, they were cruel, bullying him in a way no one should ever have to endure. And in the chaos, in a moment of fear and confusion, the man accidentally killed one of them. The other kids ran off to get help. But when they came back, they found him desperately trying to shove the boy's body down the toilet. That was Bloody Bones. After that, the town was outraged. Parents, maybe looking for justice, maybe looking for revenge, set fire to the building where the day home had been. Burned it straight to the ground. It sounded like the kind of thing you'd expect to hear around a campfire. But Jerry wasn't laughing. He wasn't even trying to scare us. He spoke like someone who knew. Someone who had been there. He told us he remembered it because he was a student at the time. And here's the part that still makes my skin crawl. The auditorium? The one we used all the time? It was connected to that burned-down building. And inside, right by the entrance, there were 2 bathrooms, one on each side. But the doorway to the boys' bathroom? It was bricked up. I don't think anyone outside the tiny town where I grew up has ever heard of this. I've told the story plenty of times, across different states, to different people, and every single time, I get blank stares. Like I just made the whole thing up. Trigger warning. This story involves abuse and harm involving children. When I was a kid, I went to a small school that covered everything from kindergarten through 8th grade. Every day, we had to walk across campus to the cafeteria, and right along that path stood this old, burned-out school building. Windows shattered and boarded up. Chains wrapped tight around the doors. The whole thing looked like something straight out of a horror movie. Teachers used to mess with us, saying that if we misbehaved, Bloody Bones would come out of that building and snatch us up. We were just little kids then, but by the time we hit 3rd grade, we'd started daring each other to get close to the building. The bravest of us would run up to the windows, peek through the boards, and count to 10. And of course, every single kid who did it swore they saw something inside. Just typical childhood nonsense, right? By the time I got to 6th grade, the school finally decided to renovate the place. They tore out the damaged parts, put in new walls, fresh windows, the works. When they reopened it as the Math and Science building, it looked brand new, clean, modern, completely unrecognizable from what it used to be. And after that, Bloody Bones just kind of faded into the background. Nobody talked about it anymore. Fast forward to the end of 8th grade. A group of us were hanging around outside the cafeteria one morning, just talking about school, reminiscing. A lot of us were heading to different high schools, so it felt like the end of an era. Someone randomly brought up Bloody Bones, and we all had the same reaction. Wow, I haven't thought about that in years. That's when the janitor walked by. Now, this guy, Jerry, he was old. He'd been working at that school for as long as any of us could remember. Hell, he'd been the janitor there since the 80s. And before that, he was a student at the very same school. So, naturally, we asked him, "Hey, Jerry, what's the deal with Bloody Bones?" He stopped, looked at us for a second, and then, without a hint of hesitation, he told us a story that still makes my stomach turn. According to him, way back in the day, the school didn't just serve as a regular elementary and junior high. It also functioned as a day home for special needs children and adults. A place where local families could drop off loved ones who required full-time care so they could go to work. The school would watch over them, feed them, keep them engaged with activities. Then, one day, something horrible happened. A group of kids cornered one of these individuals in the boys' bathroom inside the auditorium. They weren't just messing around, they were cruel, bullying him in a way no one should ever have to endure. And in the chaos, in a moment of fear and confusion, the man accidentally killed one of them. The other kids ran off to get help. But when they came back, they found him desperately trying to shove the boy's body down the toilet. That was Bloody Bones. After that, the town was outraged. Parents, maybe looking for justice, maybe looking for revenge, set fire to the building where the day home had been. Burned it straight to the ground. It sounded like the kind of thing you'd expect to hear around a campfire. But Jerry wasn't laughing. He wasn't even trying to scare us. He spoke like someone who knew. Someone who had been there. He told us he remembered it because he was a student at the time. And here's the part that still makes my skin crawl. The auditorium? The one we used all the time? It was connected to that burned-down building. And inside, right by the entrance, there were 2 bathrooms, one on each side. But the doorway to the boys' bathroom? It was bricked up. I'm new to this space, but since I can't sleep, I figured I'd finally write this down. I've had other strange experiences, too, plenty, actually, but those can wait for another night. My grandmother passed away at the end of last September. She left this world on her 93rd birthday, right around noon. She had been in hospice for about 3 weeks leading up to it. A little background. She and her sons weren't exactly close. My dad, the youngest of the 4, was the only one who really kept in touch. As for me, I was the only grandchild who visited her regularly. We had this unexpected bond, mostly over our love for wildlife and nature. There was even a little chipmunk we both adored, our shared best friend. She got to say goodbye to it, too, just before she passed. The nurses were kind enough to let me sneak the little thing into her room a few days before the end. When she first went into hospice, my 2 sisters and a couple of cousins flew out to see her. They each stayed for a few days, then left. But I stayed. I was the one who remained by her side. Every night, I slept in her hospital room, right there in the corner, just to make sure that if she woke up, she'd see a face she knew. I made the decisions for her care, choosing her medications, doing whatever I could to keep her comfortable, to make sure she wasn't in pain. And let me tell you, there was turmoil in the family. The grudges ran deep. They still do. Unresolved bitterness is something that side of my family has in abundance. A few days into my stay, I started feeling it. Something wrong. Something heavy. Oppressive, for lack of a better word. One night, my grandmother woke up suddenly, panicked, her eyes darting around the dimly lit room. She told me she had seen a large black dog coming for her. Now, I know many cultures have stories about that. Sometimes it's a good omen. Sometimes, not so much. I don't claim to understand all of it. I just know that when I felt that thing, it was like 2 magnets repelling each other. A force against another force. Something unseen pressing against me, and me, instinctively pushing back. For context, my grandmother's background was mostly Irish, with some mix of Ukrainian, Russian, or Polish Jewish ancestry in there as well. At one point, the chaplain, a nurse, and I prayed against whatever it was. My gut told me it was tied to the resentment and anger hanging over the family. A darkness that had been festering for decades. I even spoke against that same bitterness back at my grandfather's funeral when I was still a teenager. And the strangest part? We all felt it. Not just me. The nurses felt it. The chaplain felt it. Even my dad felt it. But whatever it was, it never stepped foot inside the room while I was there. It was like I had some kind of duty, a responsibility to stand guard over her until she passed. And I did. After that month, once everything was said and done, I expected to carry that unease with me. But I haven't. Not even once. These days I live out in the woods, in an RV, just me, my dog, and a few rescues. Out here, I feel nothing but peace. Always. I've been around a lot of death. Human, animal, wild, domestic. I've done wildlife rehab, worked 36-hour shifts during some of the worst times. But I've never felt anything like what I did in that hospital. Has anyone else ever experienced something like this? I'd love to hear your thoughts. I'll keep this as brief as I can. The first time it happened was when my pop passed away. After the funeral, a clock in my parents' house suddenly stopped working. It never worked again. Years later, when my Nana passed, a different clock in their home fell right off the wall and shattered. And now, it's happened again. This week, we attended the funeral for my partner, who I lost far too soon. I've been staying at my parents' house since then, and the old clock in their home, the same one that's always kept perfect time, has started acting strangely. It still ticks, still keeps time just fine, but it no longer chimes on the hour or half hour like it's supposed to. The weirdest part? You can hear the hammer move into place when it's about to chime, but then? Nothing. Before we left for the funeral, it worked perfectly. Now, it won't make a sound. I started looking into this, trying to find out if there's any history behind why this might happen. That's when I stumbled across this subreddit. I read about an old Victorian-era tradition where people would manually stop clocks in the home after someone passed, almost like marking the moment of death. But I'm struggling to find much about clocks stopping or breaking on their own, except in places like this. Has anyone else ever experienced something like this? I wanted to share one of my earliest paranormal experiences, one that has stuck with me my entire life. It was 2010. My parents had just moved us into a new apartment in a neighborhood that was predominantly Jewish. I still remember driving down the street, looking out the window, and noticing how so many people were dressed in traditional clothing, long coats, top hats, and beards. I don't have many clear memories from that time, but this one has never left me. One night, I was lying in bed, my room door slightly open, when I saw him. The man by the door. He was tall, at least 6 feet, and completely blue, like a figure made of shadow but with a strange, unnatural glow. He wore a black top hat, a long coat, and had a full beard. And he was just standing there, silent, unmoving, staring straight at me from the doorway. I panicked, squeezed my eyes shut, yanked the blanket over my head, hoping that if I just stayed still, if I just ignored him, he'd disappear. But when I finally worked up the courage to peek, he was still there. My stomach dropped. My heart was pounding. I screamed, crying out for my parents. I wish I could say that was the first and last time I saw him. But it wasn't. Night after night he came back, always standing at the corner of my door, watching. And every night, I would cry, calling for my mom. It got so bad that my parents had to move their mattress into the living room just so I could sleep near them. But even then, he didn't stop. He just moved closer. He would stand right beside the bed, looking down at me while I sobbed in my mother's arms. And then, one day, it all just stopped. The visits ended. The memories faded. For years, I tried convincing myself it was just my imagination. Just childhood fears running wild. But when I got older, during my teens, I finally asked my mom about it. Did that really happen? Or did I just make it up? She didn't even hesitate. No, you weren't imagining it, she told me. Then she gave me a piece of information I had never known before. The apartment above us had been rented by an elderly Jewish man. He had died there. Tragically. One night he slipped and hit his head on the kitchen counter. The injury was bad, so bad that he bled out on the floor. And here's the part that still makes my skin crawl. Even after they removed his body, the blood remained, soaked beneath the wooden floors. According to my mom, the sightings only stopped after a cleaning crew came in and ripped out the flooring completely. I've always wondered, was it really him? Was he just lost, stuck in a place he had lived for so long? Or was it something else entirely? Has anyone ever experienced something like this? I'd love to hear your stories. No, I don't have a source for those movies. And before you even ask, it's not the kind of mainstream adult content you can just Google with my name. These are videos of me getting murdered. Where would you even find something like that? The dark web, maybe? I have no clue. What I do know is that I don't particularly enjoy watching myself die. What I can tell you is that I've starred in over 50 of these so-called films. And according to the guy who distributes them, I'm the most watched and most in-demand snuff star in history. If that's even a real title. Now, you're probably wondering how someone ends up in this business. Well, the short version? By accident. Nobody wakes up and decides, hey, today seems like a great day to get murdered on camera. For me, it all started when I responded to an ad looking for an amateur adult film actress. I was just starting out, and the pay seemed decent enough. The shoot was at this nice house in an upscale neighborhood. Nothing about it set off any alarm bells. Everything seemed totally above board, until I asked to be paid up front. The guy just smirked and said, "Let's see how you die first." Before I could even process what that meant, I was being grabbed, held down, and the cameras started rolling. Here's what I can say about dying. It's kinda like going under for surgery. The pain at first is sharp, terrifying. But then, as your heart slows, there's this weird, almost peaceful euphoria, like a wave washing over you. Everything goes quiet. And then blackness. I can't tell you whether there's an afterlife. I don't stay dead long enough to find out. It's more like falling asleep without dreaming, just a brief, empty void before I wake up again. You'd think a guy who makes his living off death wouldn't scare so easily. But when I suddenly came to, just as they were about to dump me in a shallow grave in the woods, the guy screamed like a little girl. It took a while to get him to calm down. Honestly, you'd think he was the one who had just been brutally murdered with the way he was acting. But once the initial shock wore off, he locked eyes with me, no pun intended, and said, "I'm going to make you a fucking star." I can't go into detail about the ways I get snuffed out, but what I can tell you is that the money is insane. Way more than I ever could have made in the mainstream adult film industry. Now, my issue isn't so much that my employer profits from killing women, because, oddly enough, no other women have actually been murdered since I started. It's just me. The real problem? The attention I'm getting as my so-called popularity keeps growing. And here's the part that still messes with my head. The people who recognize me aren't some deranged psychos lurking in the shadows, fantasizing about violence. No, they're just regular people. school teachers, doctors, teenagers even. The biggest shock came one afternoon while I was sitting in a cafe, minding my own business, when a young dad walked in with his two little daughters. They were happily munching on chocolate muffins while he sat there, staring at me. I knew why. He just didn't know it yet. As I sipped the last of my latte, I looked up to see him standing right next to me, a weird grin on his face. "Do I know you from somewhere?" he asked suddenly. I was dressed for comfort, just an oversized t-shirt, a pair of sweatpants, nothing that stood out. But my tattoo, a pentagram inked on my forearm, was visible. He kept staring at me, trying to place where he'd seen me before. Just as I was about to answer, his eyes landed on the tattoo. It was like watching a light switch flip on in his head. His face went completely pale. He started to stutter then, without another word, he grabbed his daughters and rushed them out of the cafe. I had never worried about being recognized before. Why would I? The men who watched me thought I was dead. And I certainly never imagined my tattoo would be the thing that gave me away. How many girls have the same design? When I got it done, the artist told me it was a pretty common choice. But all of that changed the day I got a phone call from my mother. My poor mom had no idea what kind of business I was really in. She had convinced herself that I was into some kind of lifestyle work, maybe a personal trainer to celebrities or something glamorous like that. I think she preferred the dream over the reality. She always told her friends I was a successful businesswoman. And honestly, technically she wasn't wrong. Everything changed the night she called me, completely hysterical. She could barely get a sentence out between gasps. "You're alive! You're alive!" That's all she kept repeating over and over. I had to talk her down, reassuring her, again and again, that I was, in fact, very much alive. I waited patiently as her breathing slowed and she finally seemed to calm down. "Maddie, for a moment I thought I was talking to a ghost." My mother had always been my biggest supporter, my anchor in life, and hearing her in that state shattered me. "The police came. Men in suits, detectives, I think. They told me you were dead. Oh, my sweet girl, they told me you were gone. They found blood and something about a tape, or the internet. Those bastards nearly gave me a heart attack. But I knew you weren't dead. I knew it." That night, I packed a bag and went to stay with her. I needed to hold her, to reassure her that I was still here. But the truth? I needed that reassurance just as much as she did. Deep down, I already knew what was happening. It was only a matter of time before someone normal, would come across one of my movies and try to put a name to the woman who, by all logic, should be rotting in a shallow grave somewhere. I just never thought they'd take it seriously. I always assumed people would write them off as elaborate fakes. Because, after all, you can only star in one snuff film. Not 50. A few weeks passed. My mother had probably lost a year or two of her life from the stress, but things eventually settled. I had made up my mind. I was done. It was never meant to be a long-term thing, anyway. But if I was going to bow out, my final film had to be legendary. Go out with a bang, right? The day of the shoot, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. At first, I chalked it up to nerves. I mean, this one was going to be brutal. The kind of thing that would leave no doubt in anyone's mind. It was going to look real because it was real. And since this would be my last appearance, it only made sense that people would believe it. I knew the pain was coming, but pain had never lasted long for me. All I kept telling myself was, this is going to be my most spectacular death yet. And it was. Just as the euphoria hit, just as the world started slipping into that quiet darkness, chaos erupted. Men in SWAT gear stormed the room, rifles raised. Behind them, men in suits followed, their expressions unreadable. As always, I came back to life with a violent gasp, like a newborn taking its first breath. But this time, I wasn't lying in a blood-soaked room. I was on a cold metal slab. Blinking against the harsh fluorescent lights, I scanned the room: white walls, medical equipment, a sterile operating table. And then, standing off to the side, I spotted two men in suits. One of them was smiling. The other? He was pulling cash out of his wallet and handing it over. "Welcome back," the man in the suit said with an easy grin. He patted his pocket, where he had just tucked away a $50 bill. "I bet my colleague here that you'd come back from the dead. Looks like I just won." The other man, just as sharply dressed, smiled down at me. "I have to say, I'm a big fan of your work. Damsel in the Dungeon, absolute classic." For the first time in my entire messed-up career, I felt genuinely afraid. A cold wave of panic crashed over me as I tried to sit up, instincts screaming at me to run. But they didn't try to stop me. Instead, the two men exchanged an amused glance before handing me a hospital gown. "Where am I?" I asked, my voice uneven. One of them smirked. "Relax, it's not like we're going to kill you." Then both of them burst into laughter, as if the whole situation was some kind of joke. That didn't make me feel any better. They led me down a sterile-looking hallway and into a dimly lit room with nothing but a table and 3 chairs. An interview room. I sat. They sat. "So," I said, glancing between them, "are either of you going to tell me who you are? Or why the hell I'm here?" Their postures shifted slightly, still casual, but more controlled, more serious. "Apologies for the confusion," the first man said smoothly. "My name is Agent Harris, and my associate here is Agent Butler." I studied them. Young, professional, the kind of guys who probably had their whole lives planned out before they even finished college. "Agents?" I narrowed my eyes. "FBI or something?" Agent Butler let out a dry, almost offended chuckle. "Close. CIA. CIA. That was new." "Okay, so what do you want with me? I didn't know dying was a crime." Either of them laughed this time. Instead, Butler slid a photograph across the table. "We need your help with a delicate situation. It's a matter of national security." I looked down at the picture. A woman stared back at me, a woman who, to my shock, looked eerily like me. The same facial structure, same height. The only differences were her perfectly styled hair and the kind of wardrobe that screamed old money and power. Agent Harris tapped the photo. "This woman is the wife of Sergei Ivanov, the Russian Minister of Defense." His voice was sharp, urgent. I frowned. "And what does that have to do with me?" "She knows things, secrets that could be extremely valuable to us," Agent Harris said, his tone measured. "The problem is, her husband isn't exactly a kind man. Fortunately for us, he treats her like property. She wants out, but a man like him? He's not going to just let her walk away." I exhaled slowly. Still not seeing what any of this has to do with me. The two agents exchanged a look before turning their attention back to me. "Sergei is one of the most powerful men in Russia. Even if we managed to smuggle her out, we couldn't guarantee her safety. The only way to truly keep her safe is if she's dead. Or at least, if the world believes she is." And just like that, the pieces started clicking into place. I thought back to an old friend of mine, a guy obsessed with conspiracy theories. He used to go on and on about how the moon landings were faked in some studio, like it was the biggest lie in history. "So let me guess," I said, leaning back in my chair. "You want me to make another movie? Given my unique set of skills?" The agents glanced at each other again, but this time, they both smiled. She catches on quick, Butler chuckled. I'm starting to like her already. I picked up the photo again, studying the woman's face. The pain in her eyes, the forced smile. She had the look of someone who had given up hope. I exhaled, still holding the picture. Then I asked the only question that really mattered. How much does this gig pay? My family is gone. I watched them die, ripped away from me like flesh torn from bone. My wife, my daughter, dead. And now, the police think I did it. Like I would ever, hurt them. Those idiots at the station don't know a damn thing. How dare they accuse me of something so monstrous? I loved them. More than anything. I swear, just now, I heard something outside my door. A rustling. A shift in the air. Like someone was right outside my rundown motel room, searching for me. He's still out there. The man who killed my family. The man who framed me. I think he's saving me for last. I can feel it. He took everything from me, and nobody believes me. But you will, right? Please, just hear me out. I just need someone to listen. Someone to believe me. Before everything fell apart, things weren't exactly great. You know how it is. Family arguments, tension in the air, that heavy silence after a fight. Ours was over something stupid, a school field trip. $60 for a museum visit. Not much in the grand scheme of things, but when you're barely keeping your head above water, even small expenses feel like lead weights dragging you under. I'd been grinding myself into dust, working overtime for more than a year just to keep us afloat. But we were still drowning. Bills, groceries, car payments, insurance, the mortgage. It was all too much. So when my daughter came to me, asking for that $60, I told her we couldn't afford it. My wife disagreed. Said we could make it work. But I knew the truth, we couldn't. So I put my foot down. Said no. And just like that, I became the bad guy. That night, when I got home after another brutal 12-hour shift, I wasn't expecting much of a welcome. And I was right. My daughter was in the living room, hunched over the coffee table, drowning in homework. Papers and folders scattered around, her backpack dumped on my chair. She didn't look up when I walked in. Didn't say a word. My wife, at least, acknowledged me. From the kitchen, past the living room, she offered a lukewarm, "Hey, how was work?" I stepped inside, walked past my daughter, and went straight to my wife. Kissed her on the lips. She kissed me back, but barely. It was mechanical. Empty. Like she was just going through the motions. Disappointment settled heavy in my chest. "Long," I muttered, kicking off my steel-toed boots. "How's dinner coming?" "It's coming along," she muttered, stirring the pot. "I'm making do with what I have. Did you stop by the store on your way home?" There it was. The first jab of the night. Lately, she had a way of slipping her frustrations into casual conversation, like little daggers hidden in small talk. She never outright said she was unhappy, but I could hear it in the things she did say. How we never had the food she liked, how the house was too small, how we hadn't gone on a date in over a year. She felt neglected, and I knew it. Just one more thing on the long list of problems I wasn't fixing fast enough for her. "No, dear. I was too tired to stop at the store." She let the spoon clink against the side of the pot, shaking her head. "Well then, soup again tonight. There's not much else to work with." There was more behind those words than I could ever put on paper. She knew I hated that damn soup, the canned stuff from the food pantry. She also knew I hated the fact that we even had to go to the food pantry at all. What she was really saying was that I had failed, that because I couldn't provide, because I hadn't done my job as a husband and father, we had to rely on strangers to eat. And since I had failed, I should be punished with food I despised. "I'm sorry," I mumbled. "I worked all day." "Well, I don't have a car to go get groceries, do I?" "You have the only one. So if you don't go, then we don't eat. And I really don't want to make soup again, honey." That honey stung worse than a slap. It was sweet but laced with venom, a passive-aggressive little twist of the knife. Anger welled up in my chest. Like I didn't already know all this. Like I wasn't already painfully aware that it all fell on me, that I was the only one who could run errands, who could keep the lights on, who could make sure we had a roof over our heads. I worked myself to the bone for them, and still, somehow, it wasn't enough. She still had the nerve to make me feel like I wasn't doing enough. I opened my mouth, ready to snap. To tell her she needed to have some damn patience. That I was her husband and I deserved respect. But before I could say anything, a loud bang rattled through the house. The whole room fell still. My wife froze, gripping the spoon like a weapon. My daughter stiffened, wide-eyed, barely breathing. They looked toward the back door, waiting, like deer caught in headlights, bracing for the impact. Nothing came. After a few seconds, my wife hesitantly went back to stirring the soup. My daughter lowered her head, staring at her homework like it could shield her from whatever was out there. And me? I just sat at the dining table, taking a slow, measured breath. I was too damn tired to fight tonight. Without another word, I dragged myself into the living room and sank onto the couch. My daughter stayed where she was, still working on her assignments, still refusing to acknowledge me. But I knew she was aware of me. She was tense, her posture rigid, like I was a bomb sitting right beside her, waiting to go off. "Hey, kiddo." "Hi, Dad." Her voice was barely above a whisper, like anything louder might set me off. "What you working on?" I forced some enthusiasm into my tone, hoping she'd match it. "School stuff," she replied flatly. That was it. She had been like this for a while now, quiet, distant, shutting herself away. Gone were the days when she'd light up when I walked through the door, when she'd jump into my arms, calling me her hero. Now, she was just another stranger in my house. "Can you give me more than a couple words, sweetheart?" I asked gently. "I missed you today. I love to talk." She sat there, stiff as a statue, afraid to look at me. "Kiddo, I'm your dad. I just want to know how you're doing. School, friends, hobbies, anything. Please?" I could see it. The way her hands trembled, the way she fought back tears. "Can I go to my room?" she whispered. My chest tightened. "Why?" I asked, my forced warmth fading. "Why can't you just talk to me? I'm your father." Before she could answer, my wife cut in. "She's had a long day, and she's got homework to finish. Just let her go." I turned to her, frustration boiling over. "Oh, so you get to hear about her day, but I don't? I'm not asking for much. I just want to talk to my daughter. Why won't you talk to me?" And then, another bang. Louder this time. My daughter flinched, tears finally spilling onto her cheeks. My wife yelped, gripping the counter. Swearing under my breath, I pushed off the couch and marched toward the back door. Whatever the hell was making that noise, I was about to find out. When I stepped outside, I found a man standing by our trash bins, his back to me. Garbage was scattered across the driveway, flung in every direction like he'd gone through it in a frenzy. His clothes, Carhartt shirt, worn-out jeans, steel-toe boots, looked eerily familiar, like something pulled straight from my own closet. His hands hung at his sides, bloodied and swollen, like he'd been punching something. Or someone. "That's not right, you know." His voice was low, steady. He still didn't turn around. My skin prickled. "Who the hell are you? Get the fuck off my property." He ignored me. "It's not right the way they treat you." I stiffened. "What the hell are you talking about? You're a good man. A hard-working man. You bust your ass to keep a roof over their heads, to put food on the table. And what do they give you in return? Nothing. Not even a thank you. Not even respect. So tell me, what's the point? Why do you keep doing this to yourself?" My jaw clenched. "Because I love them." Finally, he chuckled. It was dry, humorless. "But do they love you? Do they even like you? Do they see you as anything other than a paycheck? A tool? A mule to carry their burdens?" I opened my mouth to argue, but he wasn't done. "They use you. They drain you dry, and when there's nothing left to take, they turn their backs like you're nothing. And all you get in return? One-word answers. Cold shoulders. Passive-aggressive bullshit. You pour out every ounce of love you have, and they give you nothing back." "That's not true," I snapped, my pulse hammering in my ears. "Fuck you, man. You don't know what you're talking about. They love me. We're just—" I swallowed, my throat suddenly dry. "We're just going through a rough patch, that's all." He turned his head slightly, just enough for me to see the smirk curling at the edge of his mouth. "You know I'm right. You feel it. You've felt it for a long time, haven't you? That emptiness. That loneliness. That slow, quiet death they're putting you through." My stomach twisted. "She doesn't love you anymore. She sees you as weak. Useless. Not enough. No matter how much you break yourself for her, it will never be enough. You'll always be less. And her cruelty? It's a special kind. A slow, merciless kind. The kind that kills you little by little until there's nothing left." "Stop," I muttered. "And your daughter? How exhausting, how infuriating it must be. You try. You try to reach her. To be a father. And she won't even look at you. She treats you like a monster. For what? Wanting to talk to her? To love her? How long are you going to keep rolling that boulder uphill, knowing she'll never love you back? Shut up. They hate you. Shut the fuck up. They are killing you. Crushing you under the weight of their expectations, their needs, their demands. And when you stumble? When you can't carry it anymore? They hate you for it." My fists were clenched so tightly my nails dug into my palms. My whole body was trembling. My breath was coming out in ragged, uneven bursts. And then, finally, he turned. My heart stopped. The man standing in front of me wasn't just similar to me. He was me. A hollow, drained out, nightmare version of me. His face was drawn and stretched thin, his skin pale with exhaustion. Deep, dark circles hung under his eyes, like he hadn't slept in years. His lips were cracked and dry, his hair unkempt, matted with oil and sweat. And his eyes burned with something wrong. And then I saw it, the glint of steel in his hand. A knife. One of ours. My legs locked in place. Every survival instinct screamed at me to move, to run, but my body refused. I stood frozen, unable to do anything but watch. He walked past me, not sparing me another glance, as if he already knew I couldn't stop him. I tried. God, I tried to move. I willed my body to do something. But nothing happened. I was trapped inside myself. A prisoner in my own flesh. I couldn't even turn away as he grabbed me by the shoulders and spun me to face the house. I was forced to watch. I saw him stomp up the porch, throw the door open, and step inside. The door slammed shut behind him. And then, the house erupted. I heard the pot crash against the wall, soup splattering everywhere. I heard my wife scream my name. And then I heard my voice. But it wasn't mine. It was his. It was ours. I listened as it roared in blind fury, about love, about patience, about kindness. Then came the sound of steel against bone. My wife gasped, choking on her own breath. Her eyes widened, her lips quivering. She gurgled, drowning in the blood flooding her lungs. I heard ribs snap. And through the window, I saw her body fall. And I couldn't do a goddamn thing to stop it. I could hear my daughter sobbing. Trapped. Helpless. Just like me. Why won't you just talk to me? The words crashed through the walls, my voice. But not my voice, booming in a blind, desperate rage. Then silence. She suffered the same fate as her mother. I was still paralyzed when the back door creaked open. He stepped outside, walking toward me at an unhurried pace, like a man who had just finished a hard day's work. Blood spattered his shirt, clinging to the fabric before rolling off in thick, lazy drips onto the pavement. His forearms were streaked with deep, jagged scratches, marks left by my wife's final struggle. His steel-toe boots, once tan, were now black with gore, soaked through with the proof of what he had done. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. And then, my memory just fractured. Too much. It was too much. He stepped closer, that same twisted grin stretched across his face. There was something almost playful in the way he leaned in, dragging his fingernails across my arms, scratching deep, marking me, rubbing fresh blood into my hands. My family's blood. I wanted to scream, to shove him away. But I couldn't even flinch. Then, methodically, like dressing a mannequin, he stripped me. Pulled off my shirt, my jeans, damp, sticky, reeking of sweat and fear. He peeled his own clothes from his body and slid them onto mine. They were soaked through with warmth, with wetness. It seeped into my skin, chilling me to the bone. I shivered violently as he pressed the knife into my frozen fingers, curling them around the hilt. His touch lingered for a second. Then, finally, he stepped back, tilting his head as he admired his work. And then, just before he vanished, he flashed me a wide, red smile. And I was alone. The second my body was mine again, I stumbled to my car. Hands slick, stomach churning. My vision blurred as I threw it into gear and sped off into the night. I ran. I had to run. He took everything from me, and I can't do a damn thing about it. If the police find me, it's over. I already know what they'll say, what they'll see. A man covered in his family's blood, gripping the murder weapon. A man who fled the scene, guilty as sin. They won't believe me. No one ever does. But I didn't do it. I couldn't do it. Sure, I've had bad thoughts before. Everyone has. But thoughts aren't evidence. Thoughts aren't real. I'm not capable of this. I'm a good husband. I'm a good father. I don't deserve this. Bang. A heavy, violent knock shakes the motel door. I freeze. And then, bang, bang, bang. Someone's out there. And they found me.